Hey guys, so I'm going to do a combination integration and documentation tutorial video on the HealthKit. And so in this video we're going to cover how to set it up on a new project, as well as all the settings and basically all that stuff, and just put it all into one video. It's a pretty simple setup in terms of what you need to do, so it shouldn't be too long, but there will be timestamps in the description below for those that want to skip through to certain bits. So we're going to create a new project entirely. We're going to use the flying template simply because I've never used the flying template and I want to demonstrate how easy this system is to set up. We're working under 4.14 just because that is the base level that HealthKit supports, but this should not be any different from any other future versions, and if it is, I will add a comment in the description below. So we'll create our project and let that do its thing. And I will just pause the video if this takes too long, but we'll see. It shouldn't take too long. I believe this is a pretty simple project. You can integrate HealthKit into any project as long as you have either a character or a controller, and I believe there's not really a way to make a game without at least one of those. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah. So we've got our fresh flying project here. Like I said, I've never used this, so forgive me if there's a couple of hiccups along the way, but we'll see how we go. So first thing we want to do is integrate HealthKit over. Now, because this isn't yet on the marketplace, I've just got it in this folder here ready to go. So we're just going to copy and paste into this one, which is the project. Whoops. So we're just going to copy and paste the folder over into our project because I don't have a way to use the actual marketplace/launcher. And once that's done, that should actually be ready to go. Yep, so there we go. Got it here. And we can start integrating, so both of those can actually be closed now. So to add it to our project, all we need to do is open up our pawn or controller if that's what you're using, and we just want to add the HealthKit manager. So BP underscore HealthKit manager, click compile and save. That's more or less all you need to do. You will get some functionality from there. However, for the purpose of adding and taking off health and that sort of thing, you would want to add in a couple of other little bits and pieces. So for instance, we'll click on class settings, we'll add the BP and HealthKit player interface, and that just gives us a couple of functions for adding and removing health. Okay, so we've got 3 interface events we can add. In most cases, you're only ever going to need 1 or 2, but we're going to cover all 3 in here just for the purpose of documentation. So we're going to do event, add health, and you can see the 3 we want here. Unfortunately, we have to add them separately, so add health amount, event, add health segments, and event, restore full health. And these are pretty self-explanatory by their titles, but we'll go through them anyway. So in HealthKit, we've got 4 different types of health. Now, the percentile method model is the normal game model where you've got health between 0 and 100, and then when you want to add health to your player, you'd be adding like 20 health or 15 health or whatever. So in that case, you would use this one here, which is the amount to add. So we'll set that one up to start with. We just want to drag in a reference to HealthKit Manager, and then just go add health. Oops. Spell correctly would be helpful. And then just hook that up and hook the amount to add up to the amount to add. So that one will cover both the percentile and the regenerating one, although regenerating often you don't have medkits. That's like the sort of health you see in games like Uncharted, where once you take a certain amount of damage, you have to go and take cover before you regenerate your health. The add health segments here is for the partial regeneration and overshields. So the partial regeneration is much like Zelda or Far Cry, where you've got segments of your health bar. So in Zelda you've got the hearts, in Far Cry you've literally got a health bar that's cut up into 5 or 6 segments, and it will regenerate one of those full segments. Overshields also works that way, so like in Halo you've got your overshield, but then you've also got a couple of chunks of health, and once your overshield is depleted, if you take more damage, you'll take off the segments of health. So for those 2, you'd want to use this one here, which is the add health segments. So more or less the same thing. We just drag off of here, go add segments, and we hook that up and just tell it how many segments we want to add. Now the restore full health you might want in both cases, and it's just what it sounds like. It restores all your health, and you just hook that up to the restore full health event, and done. So that's actually all you need to do for adding health. Obviously you're going to have damage as well, so what you want to do is use the Unreal Engine function called take damage. Is it? No, damage. Let's find it. Event any damage, that's what we want. And you just want to pass that through and do deplete health and hook that up there. And with that, we're actually fully ready to go. So you don't need to set up any UMG UI if you don't want to. You can use your own one if you want. But using these settings here, we can actually have one automatically generated. And we're just going to hook up a simple button event. And what we're going to do with that is just apply damage to ourselves so that we can actually see it's working. So we'll hook that up there and we'll apply, say, 5 damage. And that should be, might need to plug in a reference to that one, sure. So let's just do that anyway. We'll just add a reference to self. And if we click, and there we go, we've already got our health bar down the bottom. If we hit Q, you can see it's taking health off. So that's how you set up the project. Very simple. That worked perfectly. I've never used the flying template. And so you would generally, at most, only ever need to make these 3 events here, or these 3. There's probably not a situation where you're ever going to need both add health segments and add health amount, but they're there if you want them. So, onto documentation. So that's the integration portion done. If that's all you were here for, there you go. That's done. Now, so for documentation, first of all, we'll go over the multiple health models. We've got the percentile one, which is the one you saw here. If we take damage, it just drops our health down like that. The health doesn't regenerate back. It's simply waiting for you to pick up a med kit, so we can do that. We can. I'm not sure if the example med kits will work in this. Let's give them a go. I think they might need a character, not a pawn. Oh no, it's cast a pawn. We'll see if they should work. Okay. To work out how to control this thing. So if we take some damage and then we go down here. Oops, no, we missed it. Bear with me a second, guys. I don't know the controls for this thing. And there we go. So picked up health and that healed us. So that works there fine. And that's how you would recover your health in this instance. We've got the regenerating one. So this one doesn't actually have any UI. What happens is we just take damage. You can probably hear me mashing the keys. And there we go. We've got that set up, and it will actually regenerate, and we'll see that blood splatter go away. Now obviously you'd want to change that if you were using this in a flying game. You probably don't want blood on screen, but you get the idea. The next one we've got is partial regeneration. So this one here, you can see there's segments down there. If we take damage, it'll go down to part of a segment. If we don't take damage for a certain amount of time, it'll regenerate up to that full segment. And I believe this one's set up to fade the UI. Yep, there. So if we take more damage, same thing. And if you wanted to use health kits in that instance, there's the example health kit here does have options for health as well as segments. So you can take a look at how that works, but obviously it's all up to you how you implement that. You could have inventory items, special abilities, however you want to do it. And the final one is the Overshields. So this one we've got here, you can see there's 2 bars. The top one is an armor or shield. And if we take damage, that will actually drop that down. And then once we start to take more damage, now this is set up to wrong. Need to add the right amount of segments for that, because the material was set up with 8. We set up 8 segments. So I'll go over that in a second as well. And there we go. So we're taking segments off there. And after a short period of time, the shield will regenerate as well. Apologies there, looks like OBS stopped recording for a second. So, if you're setting up the Overshield or the partial regeneration one, you need to set up your material to match. Now, I believe in 4.15 and onwards I will have this set up automatically, but under 4.14 there's an issue with material parameter collections and blueprints that they just don't really work well with with UMG materials. So unfortunately under 4.14 this needs to be done manually, and I'm just going to cover it here in case that remains the case under 4.15. I haven't done extensive testing yet. So we've got this set up. So at the moment the material's set to 8. If we didn't want, so if you look here, the UI, it's got 8 little blocks. If we wanted that to be 10, we set that to 10 here. Then we're still going to see 8 in here, but if I start to take damage, you can see that it's not taking full segments off. That's because it's working with 10 segments, but we've got it visualizing 8. So all you need to do is jump into the materials, find the one that's called Overshield, no, segmented regeneration. So these two here, segmented regeneration fill. Open them both up. Just click on use segment count and change this to 10. Oop, no, sorry, that's the wrong one. That's for the partial regeneration. That's the one we want. So we want to open the one called Overshield border and Overshield fill. We just want to do the same thing there. Change these to 10. Change these to 10. And once we fire that up, you can see we've got 10 again there. So that's how you set that up. And as you can see there, if you wanted to do the partial regeneration ones, you use the segmented regeneration materials instead. So I'm just going to reset that back to 5. Set that back to 5. Sorry guys, I'm having some issues with OBS today. So the other thing you probably want to do at some point is set up a kill player scenario. Not always, not all games have player death in it, but generally if you're using a health system you want to set up a thing to happen when your player gets to 0 health. So probably the easiest way to do this is on your event begin play, just add in a little bit that binds it to an event. So you drag in a reference to this and you want to type bind event to kill player, and we'll just add that into our little logic beginning to make sure it runs. And so what happens is when the HealthKit manager determines that you're at 0 health, it's going to run whatever this is. So this sets up a listener event. So we can actually set up a new event here and we'll call this player death. And in this case we're just going to settle up to just print string. Obviously you'd set up your death logic, whether that's going to stop the player moving, show a screen that says you're dead, all that sort of stuff. We're just going to say the player died. And so we'll fire it up, we'll put it on a simple one that's not regenerating just for the purpose of making it quicker, and we'll add our dummy event to 25. It's a bit quicker to go through. So you'll see in a second when I hit Q next, which is our damage function, it should say player has died. Yep, there we go, the player has died. Or the player died. So that's how you add in a player death. So beyond that, we've covered the types of health, how to integrate it, and how to kill your player. We'll just go over the rest of the settings here. So initialize on begin play. If you hover over all of these, they do all have fairly detailed descriptions of what they do. So the initialize on begin play is if you want to automatically initialize the HealthKit manager. So if we look in the event begin play logic down here, see the first thing it does is checks if it wants to initialize on begin play and then does it. If you don't do this, you would need to initialize it yourself through dragging off of here and going initialize HealthKit. However, you might also need to set up the owner. As you can see here, it determines the owner type, but you can do that in various other ways. Most of the time you're going to want to use initialize on event begin play, but it might be that if you have your player load into your level and he's sitting there with enemies around him and you've got a cutscene playing or something like that, then you might want to go a different route. But generally this is what you're going to do. There's an initialized delay. Unreal Engine has this somewhat annoying little feature where because blueprints all initialize at the same time, sometimes you need to give the system a small period of time to initialize and cast everything. Otherwise you get errors and it won't initialize properly. So the easiest way to do this is just add in a short delay here before you do your initialized logic. So this is here, set up as 0.5, that should be enough for most projects. But if you have a very complicated project like an MMO or a large complicated survival game or something like that with a lot of data that needs to be initialized, you might want to raise this to a couple of seconds or whatever. In general, you're going to have that behind a load screen anyway, so it doesn't really matter what that time is as long as it's there to allow the system to initialize correctly. If you ever get access none errors on clicking play, first thing I'd recommend doing is just raising this to see if that fixes it. You've got your maximum health, that's pretty straightforward. That's the cap that your player can have in health. That can be set to whatever you want. It's set to 100 just to make it easy to work with the percents. But whatever you set it to, the system will automatically turn that into a percentage for you. The starting health will set what your player has to begin with. If it's set to 0, it uses the maximum health. If it's set to anything else, it will set it based on what it is. So if we set that to 50, fire that up, you can see it's got half health there. Got the health regen delay. So on the health systems that have regeneration, which is all three of these, you've got a delay on how long the player has to avoid taking damage before their health regenerates. And the regeneration is done based on, well, the speed of regeneration is based on this next one, which is the regen period, and that's the period it would take for a player to regenerate health from 0 to full. So if you're using 100 and you set that to 5, that means every second he's going to recover 20 health. The maximum overshield is much like the maximum health, but for your overshield, same thing, you can set that to whatever you want and the system will work that out for you. The overshield regen delay is the same as the health regen delay, but for the overshield, so that's how long the player has to avoid damage before their overshield regenerates, and the regen period, likewise, is how long it takes to regenerate from 0 to 100 for the overshield. Health segments is only for these two here, and that's just how many segments of health there is, which we covered with the materials earlier. There is a couple of things down here. These are not settings, they're working logic variables, so I would recommend not touching those. A lot of them will get overwritten even if you do change them, but you might stuff something up. So if you have errors, come in here, check they're all set to normal. If you change them, you'll get a little arrow there, just click on that and reset that. So that's the mechanical settings. We've then got the visual settings, so let's go over those. Use the HealthKit HUD is if you don't want to set up your own HUD, you can just use this one, and like you saw, it automatically adds one to the player, and it's very simple and minimalist. Using the damage indicators, so that's the blood that you saw on screen. So if we go into here and we drop that down to 0, you can see the blood, you can probably hear a heartbeat going. That's all part of the damage indicators. So if you don't want those, you can just uncheck that, and once the health gets down there, nothing will happen. You could set up your own custom stuff for that if you wanted. If you wanted to change the damage indicators, you've got the sound here very easily. It can just be changed to whatever you want. And we've also got, under blueprints, in the standard blueprints folder, in widgets, we just go to HUD indicator, and this here is our damage indicator. So you can change that, and it's actually using the material here. If you wanted to right click, go create material instance, and then you can change that in here to whatever you want. You can change the splatter map to be something a bit crazy. Let's go with that. And pulsating effect, you can turn that on or off if you want. So we go into here, we go that one there that we've just set up. There we go, so we've got that there. So that's how you set that one up. I'm going to reset that back. Whoops. Set that back to that one there, and we're done. For the other settings, we've got the threshold at which the damage indicator kicks in. So once your health drops below this threshold, that'll kick in. That's pretty self-explanatory. The audio one, if you want to disable the heartbeat but keep the visuals, you can do that. How often the audio loops, so if you have a much longer sound and you want it to loop every 10 seconds, you can do that. We can set whether the indicator fades in instantly. So at the moment, once we drop below the threshold, which is 20, I think it is, just set this up to do 85, so it's just one press. As you can see, it just turns on instantly. If you wanted to set that up to fade in, then all you need to do is turn off fade in indicator instantly, and it'll fade in like that. You can change the period of that. That will also change the fade out period. You can set up whether the HUD fades. So if we click play, after 2 seconds or 3 seconds, whatever it is, that health bar will fade away and it'll come back once we take damage. There. If you don't want that to fade, you simply turn this option here on. If you want it to start faded, then we do it like this, and it's there, not there from the beginning, but it is still there once we take damage. And then we've got a couple of controls for that fade. So the fade delay, how long you have to not take damage for it to fade out, how long it takes to fade in and out, and also a fade disable threshold. So once your health drops below this value here, you no longer fade the UI out. So if you wanted it to fade out anyway, just set that to 0. But if you wanted it so that once your player is below a certain amount, so in this case 20, then the UI will not fade away. We can also set it so that it never goes to full opacity. So if we set that at 0.5, see it's still see-through there. And then finally we just have options for the colors of the health bar and the overshield bar. So that's pretty much all the settings. As you can see, it's pretty simple to set up, very easy to customize. And yeah, if you have any comments, feedbacks, problems or questions, please leave them in the comments below. This has been submitted to Epic and is currently going through a review, so it should be on the marketplace in the next couple of weeks. Cheers!